at a Metropole TVKE across all your social media platforms. My name is Simba Elijah Charles Kiage. Thank you very much for taking your time to begin your day with us here at a Metropole Television. I am at Kiage Simba on Twitter. Hashtag Business I Am. Let's keep this conversation going on. This is your official economic review this morning. We are joined by Kevin Karubia this morning. Kevin, good morning, sir. How are you doing?
I'm very well, Simba. How are you?
Fantastic. Happy to have you around. Kevin is an investment analyst. We also do expect to be joined shortly by George Munga and Rodney Amakolo to take us through the next couple minutes in this very important conversation this morning. Let's get it started then, shall we? Now, the public wage bill is expected to drop for the very first time in a decade under the International Monetary Fund reforms agenda. Commission on Revenue Allocation (CRA) data now indicates that spending on salaries and benefits of the public sector will drop by 77 billion to 526 billion from 603 billion in the year to June, representing a 12% drop. Kenya has for years struggled to contain its ballooning public sector wage bill that has squeezed funds for development, forcing the state to go to loans for financing development projects and paying salaries. A story covered by Business Daily last week indicates that the move could be a deal between the government and the International Monetary Fund to streamline allowances in the public sector, even as Treasury projects that spending on salaries and allowances could rise to 550.7 billion in the year to June 2023. The government also plans to abolish job-related benefits that make up the biggest part of the gross monthly pay in the sector. Last month, the Salaries and Remuneration Commission (SRC) introduced a cap for allowances at 40% of their gross monthly pay, thus paving way for the further realigning of the allowances in the country. Let's therefore look at where we are from that data set that we have for you this morning. And if you look at the government recurrent expenditure, then you will say it has been rising all the way from 2015 to financial year 2019-2020. We're waiting to close 2020-2021 for us then to have a proper projection on exactly where we are in terms of that recurrent expenditure. And if you look at where we are from 2017 to 2020 in terms of Kenya debt to IMF, you will see that the big jump from 2019 and especially in 2020 when we over-relied on them for budgetary expenditure or support, and also what they've done to also support our fight against the coronavirus pandemic. That's why they're pushing heavily for that, for those reforms. And if you look at where we are, again, credit and loans from IMF from January to July 2021, there's that big jump in May to June. We do know that's when the credit facility came in, and then we expect that indeed it plateaued in July, because then we do know exactly what credit support we've been getting from IMF. Fantastic. Let me introduce George also to the conversation. George, good morning, sir. How are you doing?
Morning, Elijah. Morning.
Happy to have you around, sir. All right, Kevin, let me begin with you this morning. When we read this headline, fine, a drop by 77 billion, that is quite considerable, but we needed IMF to come in to intervene for Kenya to take action against its ballooning wage bill. I mean, has been a concern, Kevin. What do we read into this? I mean, we had a lot of promises from SRC saying that they want to actually drop down the public wage bill, but it had to take IMF to come in and force things to happen.
Yes, Elijah, it's a sad state of affairs concerning that, because we've had the regulation, we've had the laws and the legislation, but we've just not acted on it. Because, for example, the PFM Act of 2012 states that the wage bill should be below 35% of our total revenue. And for example, in the past fiscal year, the 2020-2021, it was at 48% of our total revenue and 56% of our ordinary revenue, which is way above what the PFM Act states for us. And this has been caused by the SRC being unable to completely carry out their mandate, and also lack of political goodwill from the parliament and the judiciary. So the SRC has been unable to carry out its mandate. And it's sad that it had to come down to the IMF reforms so as we can be able to access some of the loan facilities.
Yes.
So what we should really be seeing is a conservative effort by the government to reduce the wage bill, not only to access loans from the IMF, but so as to extend more funds for development rather than recurrent expenditure.
Yes, fantastic. I'll be coming to you, Kevin, on that as well, on what the hold has been really. Let's just look at the composition of the wage employment in this country, and that's the first data set that we have for you there. Now, George, the biggest one that we have is ministries and other extra budgetary institutions that account for 24%. Now, followed by the Teacher Service Commission. So actually the biggest one is the Teacher Service Commission, I beg your pardon, at 38%. Ministries and the other extra budgetary institutions at 24%. And we do have county governments at a 22%. That is a snapshot of exactly where that money indeed does go to in terms of payment of salaries in the country. George, when you look at that, 38% TSC and 24% ministries and other budgetary offices in the country, it looks as if indeed the promise to manage the public wage bill, when you also want to grow the economy, can they go hand in hand?
Well, Elijah, it can, and that is why SRC was incorporated into our 2010 Constitution, Elijah.
Yes.
And this morning I was listening to the CEO of TSC saying that they have been allocated, I think, 5,000 new teachers in the new year, which she thought was too low. But Elijah, if you look at our wage bill overall, that is both the national and the county governments.
Yes.
You realize that there are a lot of inefficiency inbuilt. In fact, I dare say that there's a time that the president said that there were a lot of ghost workers that were in the system that need to be weeded out. I think our problem is not about the number of people working in government, but the number of people who are earning salaries are not working. That is our biggest problem.
Yes.
Elijah, most of these government institutions, if you have to go into them, you will find there are so many people with very little being delivered, Elijah. A task that can be done by one or two people, you'll find maybe 10 people doing the same thing. And that brings me back to what IMF did, I think, in the late 90s, the structural adjustment programs that saw a lot of retrenchments in government. And after the massive retrenchments, Elijah, there was still enough labor force to carry out what government was supposed to carry out.
Yes.
I think what government needs to deal with is, one, efficiency in their operations. Once they achieve that, Elijah, and then weed out corruption, they'll be able to not only tame the wage bill, but also increase the productivity of most of these civil servants or government workers. But as it is, Elijah, I can bet you that it is not sustainable. We've sung this time and again. I saw the last IMF report that Kenya government is borrowing around 8 billion every day to sustain its operation. Look at that vis-a-vis what we collect. It is not sustainable. Sooner or later, we will come to what we call a dead end, where we cannot sustain our recurrent expenditure from what we collect from in our economy. What this brings us to is that government must continue borrowing in order to sustain its day-to-day spending. Elijah, you saw most of our public universities are technically insolvent. And why is that? They are not able to generate revenues to pay their workforce, and therefore they are requesting the exchequer to increase their allocation or to give them a debt write-off so that they can be able to continue in operation. And that is the sad state of most of our parastatals. They are operating on what we call government grants or government debt waivers so that they can continue operating from point A to point B. And that is not sustainable. I would wish that IMF put their feet on the ground and insist that government restructures its operation so that they can be able to finance their recurrent expenditure, so that whatever we borrow, Elijah, goes into development and not into day-to-day consumption of the government.
Yes. All right, Kevin, let me get to you on that as well. And I'll be coming back to you, George, on what the link between a growing economy and the wage bill should be actually, because we're talking about Kenya's economy growing. That means that we got to also think about the workforce that's behind it, also from the private sector and the public sector will also come in and fill this. That's later on, Kevin. But under this, they're saying that the biggest chunk of these salaries is actually from allowances and benefits that employees in the public sector benefit. Is that what it is? Is it possible to say, let's go back on that and say, Kenya is struggling to repay its debt. Kenya is struggling with its collections. Let's review what benefits actually do go into that. We do know now that we're reviewed back to 40% of what is your basic pay, but do we need to go further downwards, Kevin?
I think first capping it at 40% is a step in the right directions first.
Yes.
But what we should be looking at is narrowing down the number of these allowances. Because even as the SRC had put out, we have about 257 broad categories of allowances, which cannot really be accounted for why they should be there.
Yes.
And also on their cost. And the SRC has said that they are looking down to trim them down to 5 categories. And all state corporations have to submit a list of their allowances within the new framework, which are only 5 allowances. And this has been 5 groups of allowances. And this is what we needed to do a long time ago, because we have been seeing government and state corporations, for example, can have a seminar in Mombasa for no apparent, no reason why they should not do it here, but they've gone all the way to Mombasa. They are raking in per diems per day, a different type of allowances per day. So this move by the SRC to whittle down the allowances at least to 5 categories, and then now they can be looked at from those categories and see what do we need, what can we do without, and how can we make these systems more effective. And
yes.
As even George has put across, there was that report done by the Devolution Ministry it was called the CAPS report, which showed the number of ghost workers in our ministries, the number of ghost workers in our state corporations, but it was not really acted upon because we are still seeing the same numbers, the same wage bill numbers as we were seeing before. So it's really about operationalizing what we have. If it's the ghost workers, let's weed them out. Let's ensure that the salaries are going to the right people. Let's do job evaluations to ensure that people are being paid for what they are producing and that roles are not being duplicated. And so as to ensure that even when these allowances are being paid, they're being paid to the right people for the right purpose and in a proportion that makes sense to our economy and not to hurt our economy.
Pretty much. Now, George, let's then address that question. The link between a growing economy and the number of the workforce behind that economy. There has to be a link because if you look at county governments now, they account for 22% of how much money we pay in the public sector. A majority of these counties are even saying that we don't have enough. Some of them have not even fully devolved their functions, which they actually say they need more workforce behind that as well. Some of them have even gone beyond and contravened the PFM Act and used more money to pay salaries as opposed to directing these monies to development. George, is there a link? Is that where the SRC has been sort of unable to justify for us? George, could you unmute your mic, sir?
Sorry, Elijah. I was saying, world over, Elijah, yes. If you're to grow your economy or if you are to grow your employment numbers, you don't focus on employing people in the public sector or in government institutions.
Yes.
You focus on increasing the production in the private sector so that the private sector can now absorb the workforce that is available in the market.
Yes.
In Kenya, we are doing it the other way around, that we want to employ as many people as possible in the public sector and tax the private sector as much as possible so that we can support the public sector. What that does, Elijah, is instead of increasing our economic growth, it depresses the already existing private sector so that they cannot produce more. Elijah, our economy exports very little, so to speak. If you count our exports, it's quite little. That tells you that our focus is not right. When devolution was brought into play, that is in 2013, what my expectation was as an individual,
yes,
that we'll start seeing companies, or we'll start seeing enterprises in our rural areas, in our far-flung areas. But what we saw is that most people were angling to get into civil service via the county governments. And you've seen very little economic activity, so to speak, with devolution. Of course, it has been there, but it is very little compared to what has been invested in those institutions. Elijah, we need to reverse this so that our focus goes back to increasing private sector production. If we do that, Elijah, that I can bet you that will not only increase our employment levels, but we'll see our economy growing by probably 8-9%. Remember, currently we are growing at between 4 and 5%. Let me get back to the wage bill.
Yes.
The moment the percentile increase in your wage bill year on year is greater than your increase in economic growth or in GDP growth, then there is a problem, because that essentially says that you are using most of your resources to pay salaries or to pay recurrent expenditure, and very little is going into development expenditure. I was reading the Treasury report the other day, and they say that a big percentage of our revenues currently are going into debt repayment. Another very huge percentage, Elijah, I think over 40% going into debt repayment, another 30% going into recurrent expenditure. We are left with around 20% to do development. And that tells you why we are seeing a very muted economic or GDP growth in our economy. So my challenge to Treasury and to planning is that we need to reduce our recurrent expenditure as much as possible. And the biggest percentage of our recurrent expenditure is our public wage bill. We need to reduce that as low as possible and encourage private sector growth. If we did that, then we'll go back to where we were in 2003, 2004, 2005, 2006, when we had our former President Kibaki in power. We need to see enterprises coming up, Elijah. When an economy is growing, Elijah, you'll see it around. You'll see enterprises coming up. You'll see a lot of employment going around, and you'll see that there's a lot of cash flow around. But if that is not done, then we'll see our economy growing in the reverse. We might see even 1%, 2%, 3% economic growth, Elijah. Remember, in this country, we had witnessed a negative economic growth at one time, Elijah, and we don't want to go back there.
Pretty much. All right, Kevin, in 45 seconds, if you may, yes, we might be celebrating these reforms. We might be talking about, well, reduce the public wage bill. But remember, this one, 77 billion worth of a reduction, is quite a huge number. Should we be celebrating these reforms, or should we look at the other side of the coin? What is going to be the impact of these reforms that our IMF is pushing in the economy?
Yes, Elijah, first, I'm very bit skeptical on that number, because this is just an estimate that is being given by Treasury and
yes,
can even change with the tabling of the supplementary budget. And I'm curious to see as to exactly how this reduction is coming across, because we've not had like new regulations or new ways to bring down the wage bill. So I'm still a bit skeptical on how the 77 billion how the cut will come across. So we'll have maybe to wait and see, and maybe from further guidance from the National Treasury or further information, so that we can really know is it even actionable in the first place, or are we just throwing numbers to the IMF so that we can be able to secure those facilities? So from my end, I think it's quite a wait and see. We have to take a wait and see approach.
So quite a wait and see. So let's wait and see whether this 77 billion is actually indeed a figure, because we do have Treasury as well saying that they do expect the public wage bill by June of 2023 might jump to 550.7 billion, regardless of this 77 billion drop that they expect for the first 6 months of 2021. All right, gentlemen, let's move on to the next of this morning. Well, the High Court has stopped the Kenya Revenue Authority, KRA, from adjusting excise duty by 4.97%. Justice James Kamau directed KRA to retain the prices of the commodities as they currently are, pending the determination of a case filed by an advocate, Maura Kabata. This is after the lawyer proceeded to court on the basis that consumers and manufacturers are set to suffer financially from the heightened tax pressure. Mr. Kabata said the cost of products would rise, leading to diminishing returns for business owners in the manufacturing sector, increased cost of products in the market, which would lead to an influx in counterfeit products in the market. And I quote, "This will not only erode the markets and business environment, but also risk health and life whilst eroding consumer rights." That's end quote. That's according to Mr. Kabata. And the bar owners also moved to court last week seeking to challenge the Gazette notice published by KRA on November 2nd. The Kenya Revenue Authority, under legal notice, addressed the duty charged on about 30 products, including bottled water, juice, motorcycles, and beer, by 4.97% to also cover the inflationary costs. Now, consumers could pay as much as 5 shillings and 77 cents more for a litre of beer, with a rise in duty which has been fixed at 121 shillings and 85 cents from 116.8%. Now, the tax on spirits has gone up by 13 shillings and 20 cents to 278 shillings and 20 cents per litre, while wine now attracts a duty of 208 and 20 cents per litre, 9 shillings and 86 cents rise. Now, the taxman had initially targeted about 3.7 billion in additional revenue from inflation-adjusted taxation this fiscal year ending June 2022. George, as a tax expert, without mentioning that case, by law, George, KRA is mandated to adjust the prices owing to the inflationary inflationary adjustments. Now, what we do know, it stands at 4.97%. As far as KRA are concerned, they were supposed to adjust it. But then we feel that because of the coronavirus pandemic, because majority of businesses in the country right now are recovering, and George, we are coming from a 10% growth in a Q3, meaning things are pointing northwards. Everybody does feel that the economy is headed the right direction now. So KRA also feel that because the economy then is headed the right direction and we might hit the 6.2% growth numbers by the end of this year, why not come in with 4.97% inflationary adjustment? By law, they are mandated to do that.
Elijah, thank you for that. I want to mention this, that KRA is mandated by law to collect our revenues across the country. That is their mandate, and
yes,
we cannot begrudge them for doing that. But again, KRA operates in an ecosystem. They don't operate in utopia, so to speak. And why am I saying that? We are just carving out. In fact, we are not even yet out of the COVID pandemic. And most companies suffered quite heavily during the pandemic. We are less than, I think, a quarter after the lifting of the dawn to dusk curfew. I know that the law allows KRA to adjust the excess tax percentile in line with the inflation figures. But I doubt that this is the right time to do that. Remember, most companies reported very muted results for the year ending 2020. And this is the time that they're trying to recover. And then again, Elijah, Kenya is one of the very heavily taxed countries across the world, not only in Africa. And for me, I would want to see at least let us maintain our tax levels where they are. In fact, I'm even thinking of a scenario where KRA might even want to reduce some of their tax, Elijah.
Yes.
If you look at a bottle of beer, the tax that go into it are quite heavy. Remember, it attracts VAT, it attracts now the excise tax, it attracts income tax, because at the end of the day, the company must pay income tax on that particular product. So probably a product that would cost, say, 40, 50 shillings might end up costing one. What it does is that it reduces the disposable incomes of your citizenry, because I can bet that for our folks who consume this product, they would have to find this money to be able to finance that particular lifestyle, and therefore they don't have extra cash to do other things. So in summary, my point here is that increasing the excise tax on beer to 4.97% is their mandate. Yes, it's KRA's mandate, but I think the timing is not right. Maybe this is something that they should have held for the next 1 or 2 years before they effect this. And if you ask any player in that industry, they will tell you that their biggest challenge, as it is today, is taxation. In fact, from where I sit, I handle a lot of tax issues for most players in that particular sector, ranging from VAT to excise tax to stamp duty to all manner of taxes that are levied on these players. So I think the KRA, or the government as it is, one of the pillars that I think President Uhuru Kenyatta had when he was coming in the second term was manufacturing. And you don't encourage manufacturing by taxing the players in that industry very heavily.
Yes.
You encourage manufacturing by reducing taxes, by opening up that space so that more entrants can come in, and by putting the environment friendly to any investor in that field. So I think KRA, that's their mandate, yes, but I think this might not be the right time to increase that tax head on those particular products, Elijah.
Pretty much, George, I'll be coming back to you because there's a figure here, 3.97 billion, and we do know that KRA now have the biggest target yet this year. Kevin, let's weigh in on that as well. From where KRA is seated, per law, they are supposed to adjust. In fact, if they don't adjust it, then they're contravening the law. So now it's 4.97%, but then we've rushed to court saying, well, the economic conditions now are not favorable. But if you listen to Treasury, they're saying that the economy is rebounding, and they're quite sure that once we close this year, it's going to be by 6.2%. In fact, in Q3, we grew by 10%. We've never seen this in 4 decades, Kevin, meaning that things are pointing northwards. So why not adjust? So that now KRA celebrates that they're getting something out of this growing economy, and we also say the economy is growing, so we are doing fine.
Elijah, yes, we've seen the rebounding from the coronavirus pandemic.
Yes.
But we also have to remember that this growth is coming from a low base, which was in the second quarter last year, because
Yes.
it was subdued. So we can't really say it's 10.1% growth, an outright growth of 10.1%, because you have to remember that this is being compared to Q2 2020, which was very subdued for us. So yes, it can be a 10.1% growth, but in actual terms, were we to look at maybe other previous second quarters,
Yes.
maybe 2019, 2018, then we can see that this growth is not as much as the 10.1% shows.
Yes.
And KRA are caught between a rock and a hard place, because, as you've said, the Excise Duty Act of 2015 allows them to adjust for inflation at the average rate for the previous year. But we also have to look at it, just as George is stating, that yes, we have to, KRA are mandated by law to adjust for inflation. But is it really the right time? And the sectors that are being hurt by this adjustment for inflation are sectors that have seen very subdued economic activity, such as maybe the services, the hospitality sectors. These are the sectors that are trying to pick themselves up from the dust of 2020, and then we come and impose higher taxes on them, which means that even if it's in the manufacturing sector, then people are going to start shunning those products, and those companies will be going back on the gains that they've made. So, in as much as KRA is mandated, I think we should approach it to come up with maybe a moratorium of sorts between KRA and these industry players, so that they can agree. Maybe can we push this back maybe for until we close out this period, or can we maybe adjust it at a lower rate? So these are the conversations that we need to be having.
Yes.
To ensure that we're not hurting these sectors that are very keen to rebound. And you have to remember that even for the hospitality sector, we are not even seeing a lot of tourists coming in from outside the country, because we have even lockdowns in other parts of the world, such as Europe. So it's going to be tough for these sectors to rebound at the moment. So adding an extra 4.7% excise duty on them, which they have to pass to the consumers at the end of the day, will be counterproductive on what we want to see. And so we really need to see that effort from the KRA and the industry players, so that we can be able to have an agreement of sorts.
Pretty much. All right, gentlemen, I'd like us to take a short break, but once we come back, George, you'll be on that specific one. I mean, that is potentially 3.97 billion of KRA's target. This is, we have to look for other places to get the 3.97 billion. But then we're talking about this at a time where we also know that our forex reserves are reducing because we're also getting into debt repayments in this particular quarter. Once we come back here on our Business AM.